again, the mantra adapt or die, or the other
Mm.
mantra adapt and overcome. Many times, your characters have lives, unto themselves. So you have to let those lives evolve and see, what happens. Sometimes you can predict their trajectory by virtue of the things they've said and done to date.
Welcome to the Delos Diaries, where we explore the untamed frontier of writing and creativity. Join your host, Paul Delos Santos, a writer and self-published author, as he navigates the ever-evolving world of storytelling.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the Delos Diaries. I'm your host, Paul Delos Santos. I'm here with author Aaron Ryan. Aaron, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you doing, Paul?
I'm doing well, doing well. What time is it over there where you live?
It is 12:32 p.m. PST.
Same. I'm in the same time zone, so this really helps works out for both of us. Well, I always like asking this question to all my guests, but what got you into writing?
Man, actually, it was an assignment, right? So my second grade teacher gave us all an assignment. So I'm sure there's other, 51-year-old writers out there that could trace their influences back to Mrs. Walker. But I was given that assignment to write a crude, just our own little imagination story, using construction paper for the folding, cover,
Mm.
uh, college lined, 3-hole punch paper, and do your own little stick figure drawings. And I wrote it, and I was like, this is pretty cool. I created it, which was the coolest thing about it is, wow, I did that. But then, boy, I went into Lord of the Rings early and read that sucker, and I was absolutely blown away at the depth and breadth of it and how long he took to write it. It was just blew me away. And I thought, what if Tolkien can do it, why not me?
Yeah, I mean that's how it always works, right? I was thinking the same thing with Jules Verne for me personally. So, Around the World in 80 Days was the first real novel that I read, and it was a kid's version, so it makes sense. So, just overall, how did Tolkien influence you in terms of what you like to write? I mean, it seems like we like to write based on what we read.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have the One Ring, hanging around my neck. This is actually not the real One Ring. See, I'm still here, still
Yeah.
here, still here. I have my family's names engraved on the inside, but it's amazing because as I've written my own stories, they are not. They do have some elements of fantasy, sure. My sci-fi alien invasion hexology is a set of 6 books. There are nods to Tolkien in there. There are definitely tips of the hat to Tolkien in terms of narrative style, in terms of world building, in terms of conversational, dialogue structuring between characters. And how could it not be when you're that young and that formative, and Tolkien is Tolkien, and you start reading that and ingesting the grandeur that came with those books, they do find their way out in writing. So I'll never forget them. I mean, I'll never forget just the smell of opening up the original, Lord of the Rings paperback and go, oh, it just smelled like knowledge, and it stuck in my soul.
Which is your favorite one of the series?
I love all of them. So in movie form, I really prefer the Return of the King.
Okay.
In book form, I really prefer the Fellowship of the Ring. Or I'm sorry, no. In book form, I prefer the Two Towers. I just love how the stories diverge, and then you're
Mm.
following multiple viewpoints and multiple time frames that somehow align, in Tolkien's calendar, in the appendices. But I think they just took too many liberties with the Two Towers movie form, so I tend to lean towards Return of the King for that one.
Return of the King is always a good one. Two Towers actually is one of my favorites. So because of the battle scene, I mean, I think everyone talks about that battle scene. And how is it in the book? Because I haven't read the book in so long. I think you have a better memory than I do when it comes to this when it's this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. I think it's really hard to visualize something like that,
Mm.
or to envision a great grand battle, that and Minas Tirith. I think Tolkien did the very best job that he could in terms of being descriptive. But Tolkien takes, he's criticized for this often. He takes 5 paragraphs to describe a hill, and it's just people are just so whiny. I think that he did a great job in world building. I think he did a great job in action settings, and the battles. I think they're all very descriptive and beautifully done.
Well, world building is always a fun part about writing. It seems like. What's your favorite part about world building?
The building of the world.
Hmm. Naturally.
um, yeah, before I first put the very first paragraphs down for Dissonance Volume 1 Reality in November of 23, my wife and I rewatched I Am Legend. And it's such a great movie. I mean, it's a tragic movie, but what I love is the quiet of the opening scenes. After it's proven that the cancer virus resulted in rabies and an outbreak of contagion and all of that. But you see weeds, growing up through the cracks, 6 feet tall. You see lions roaming the street, and the Earth's custodians are taken out of the way, and you see what we all see every day, except it's just completely subtracted of humans. I love the contrast of that because you would expect to see hustling and bustling of carbon life forms.
Mhm.
They're all four-legged is the only ones that you see. I just think I love sculpting it and creating it and envisioning what it would look like, in my case, 16 years after an alien invasion. What would Earth really look like? And that takes a while to envision, so had to be careful with it.
How do you go approach that to make sure it matches what your vision is? Because it seems like that's the hardest part is not just necessarily building a world from scratch, but you're taking a concept of the Earth itself and moving it forward after a certain specific thing. How difficult was it for you initially? And then once you got into a flow, I assume it was really easy.
Yeah, it wasn't truthfully that hard, and I don't mean to sound cavalier about that. Ultimately, what I really wanted to do was I wanted to have my characters thread their way through natural terrain that we know today. So street names are the exact same in 2042 as they are in 2025 or 2024. The characters are navigating, actual cities, actual streets, going through actual buildings that you'd see on Google Maps. So what I had to do was I had to envision, would this still be here 18 years from now when I wrote it in 2042 or 2024 rather. It's set in 2042. So would it be there 18 years later? How much would it have changed? So you got to think about things like that. Naturally, after an invasion and after the custodians are taken out of the way, the post-apocalyptic scene is one of just disheveled disarray and crumbling buildings and things falling into disrepair. That was fairly easy to envision. What was the difficult part was assigning that disrepair equally among different buildings and things that they would go into, because I was seriously having them navigate actual buildings that you would see on Google Maps,
Mhm.
and addresses. So you have to be
Yeah.
careful with that.
Another author told me that they like to view their setting as a character itself because it's going to be alive in some way, shape, or form. So, how did you bring
Yeah.
your world to life in terms of in your novels, in terms of the world itself and being a character of itself?
I love the word verisimilitude. I first heard that when Richard Donner was talking in the director's cut of Superman 1 or 2. I love the word. And I really wanted verisimilitude. I didn't want a military person in particular to pick up my book and go, what? That's not even correct. So I did a ton of research. It was all Google. I swear I'm on a terrorist watch list somewhere because of all the things that I've Googled. And so be it. I needed to glean as much as I could from as many different topics. You really have to hand it to the authors of old who didn't have Google and so much information at their fingertips. But I did an incredible amount of research, and particularly for volume 2 of Dissonance, and especially for volume 3, talking to people in my life that were actually tangible humans. A senior airman, two senior airmen in the Air Force, a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, a retired Army chopper pilot, a retired 35-year captain of an aircraft carrier, and a I'm not sure what his designation is at a local joint military base. But man, I got all of the details from them that I needed. They gave them to me. I put them in the book. They read it. They said, that's legit. That's right. So that was very validating.
I think a lot of people underestimate the amount of research that goes into fiction novels. I think a lot of people just assume that we create the worlds and we just go off of what we feel. But how important is that research and just doing that legwork to kind of make it so it's accurate to what you're trying to portray in this world?
I think it's so important. I think it's crucial because if one little element of your story falls apart, the rest of the story is capable of falling apart. And I tend to think of the one person who is ADD when you're giving a presentation. If you have a fly sitting on your head while you're giving a presentation and you're really wanting to connect with people, you've already lost them because you haven't paid enough attention to this fly. sitting right in your head. That's what people will fixate on. And why doesn't he swat it away? And does he not know it's there? And they miss your whole message. So, and I think, you remember back when, the old VP, Trump's old VP Pence, did a debate and a fly landed on his head. And that's what people fixated on. They don't remember his answers. So I think it's absolutely critical. It's indispensable to pay super close attention to everything that you need to when you're world building and when you're telling your story. If you don't, there's plot holes aplenty. There's people's eyes were blue in one chapter and now they're brown. You have to keep track of all of that.
Mhm. Just how hard is it to keep track sometimes when you have, like, sprawling narratives in terms of, like, how many different characters? I mean, it just seems like you gotta keep track of, like, I think Tolkien probably had a field day trying to remember all his characters in terms of, like, the details he wrote about them.
Yeah, dossiers and this and that. What I tend to do is if there's someone's going to have a defining characteristic, I tend to keep that in front of me at all times in the narrative. So what I'm doing is I'm a pantser, by the way. There's two different
Okay.
types of
Yep,
writers.
there are.
There's a plotter or a planner, and then there's a pantser. Plotter, planner, bullet points, flow charts, index cards, full on, complete Thomas guide, to
Mm,
date myself, of navigating your way through the story. And then a pantser is somebody who is just, for the listeners, is somebody who's much more organic, fly by the seat of their pants, and they kind of allow the characters and the story to lead them, and they just,
mm,
follow along and tell it well. And so I'm much more organic that way. As I write, I have a rough idea of what I want to say, but I love how it evolves and oftentimes turns into something way better than I could have planned. But a few, inches down that page, I do have bullet points that remind me what color eyes Charlie has and why Sage fell in love with her in the first place. Who is whose father? No spoilers. Um, you know, things like that. So I never keep those crucial details far from my sight, and I'll never forget them.
yeah, it's, like, always fun because a lot of novelists I've interviewed so far are pantsers. Like, there's a couple planners and there's a couple people who've evolved from pantsers to planners. So it's like, you know
I think it's safe to say that you should really be balanced. You should have a
Yep.
little bit of both. So, and some stories, you may get a great idea for a story, and you may be by nature, very nature, a pantser, but then the story demands that you become more of a planner, or vice versa. You're much more of a pantser, but the story is so branching and multi-phased, and it's got tentacles everywhere. It's a
Mhm.
it's a highway interchange, and you need to adapt, and adapt and overcome is the mantra. You need to be able to shift gears and turn that approach into a pantser approach and go with it. um, I was actually at a conference this past weekend, and a young boy asked a question of the panel. I was a panelist, and I gave them the same advice. If you are by nature a planner and you're writing pantser style, that's going to buck up against who you are. The same is true the other way around as well.
Do you feel like there's sometimes your characters surprise you when they do something that you weren't planning
Oh,
for or account for?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wrote I wrote one that I had no intention of writing this character so nefarious in volume 1 of Dissonance, reality. I had no intention of turning them into a bad guy, quote unquote. When they did what they did, it surprised me, and that's a really good example of characters. You letting the character tell the story, you letting them lead you, and that is the very essence of life, is it not? Art imitates life. Life is messy. We're going to a wedding. We're all dressed up. It's someone we care about. We're almost there. Flat tire, and we smash our fender in the process. Can't get there, and so we things get messy. There's a Russian author who said one of the author's goals is to get your protagonist up a tree and throw rocks at them and see how they fare, because how they navigate their way out of that dilemma really reveals a lot of their character.
Yeah, like, I remember, my characters also taking deep routes that I wasn't expecting them to do. They were like, "Did you really mean to romance that person, or did you really mean to do that?" I mean, it's just always weird to me that you don't intend for a character, like, these characters are in your head, but that they take on life of their own. So that's always
Yeah,
interesting to me how that develops.
yeah, absolutely. But I love how it develops that way, because there are a lot of things that can happen to your character. Whether or not they're supposed to happen to your character is another matter. You can always reverse course as a pantser. You can go down a path, see where it leads, and then if you don't like where it's going, reverse course, delete all that, start again. I have written passages where I'm going, I don't really know where I'm going with this, and I actually frankly love that. In my 9/11 historical fiction thriller Forecast, I had some developments happen early on and went, oh, do I really want to? Yeah, okay, let's see where this leads. And I'm so glad I did, because it turned into a way better story
Mhm.
because of that inclusion, keeping it in.
Just staying on your toes, it seems like something that people don't understand about being a writer is that, sometimes we're gonna have to create something on the fly with a character that we didn't anticipate to do
Yeah.
things. Like, do you feel that's underrated, for an underrated skill in terms, like, for writers to develop?
No, I mean, again, the mantra adapt or die, or the other
Mm,
mantra adapt and overcome. Many times, your characters have lives, unto themselves. So you have to let those lives evolve and see, what happens. Sometimes you can predict their trajectory by virtue of the things they've said and done to date, and those give you a track record of predicting how they'll respond in the future. But one of the greatest things is you can have them completely go a different direction. And in my new post-apocalyptic YA trilogy, The End, I have a massive, massive redirect at the end of the movie, and a character makes a massive shift as far as who they are. I love it. I can't wait to have that sprung on people,
mhm.
because it's night and day. People are just gonna, yes, throw their hand up in the air, and can't wait.
Oh man, that's always the best part, is when you can come up with a twist or a turn that just catches people off guard, but they can kind of see the seeds being planted. And I think that's where the planner in me comes a little bit. I'm like, okay, where can I have these little mini moments? Because as I try and pants that type of organic feel, it's like I'm reacting to what they're doing. So it's like, oh, then the turn feels a little less natural. So it's like this character doesn't turn. So it just feels that way, in the sense that writing characters is a very difficult task sometimes, when they're, especially since they do have lives of their own.
Yeah, yeah, it's a difficult task all around. I mean, no matter what type of writer you are, no matter your level of expertise, if you've been writing for 30 years or 30 minutes, it really doesn't matter, because every story is its own new story. One of the hardest things I've found is being so immersed in the story that you just wrote and falling in love with it. And it's really hard to disengage from that, wipe the slate clean, and have a carte blanche approach to something brand new that has nothing to do with your previous story. It's really hard to decouple, or to
Mhm.
rather to uncouple and to detether. No, uncouple and untether. Uh, because you just feel like you're gonna, you're out in orbit. You're gonna be drifting off in space, and where do I go from here? And but the tether always remains. You are tethered to creativity.
Mhm.
um and that, I should write a bumper sticker for that one. You are tethered to creativity, uh because you are. It doesn't matter, it's a whole new story, whole new flavor, whole new characters, but you still have you, and you're able to create something new out of nothing.
What kinda influences you to build the characters you're creating? I know some people like to take real life people and kinda just, like, tweak personality types, and others like to just write a character from scratch and see where they go, and others just, like, take traits of other people and combine to make a super person.
So what I do is, it's very hard for me to come up with names. That's a
Mhm,
challenge. A good name for a character, and I tend to draw upon. I don't tend to. I do draw upon people in my actual life who have this name, and then they have that name, and I'll take their first name and their last name and put them together,
mhm,
and then you've got a whole new character. So, and attributes, yes, there are some characters that remind me of people in real life in my own orbit, but sometimes the characters really just are me. Um, I'm a very cynical person by nature. I'm also very trusting, so that's a weird dichotomy. But usually, at first face value, I'm pretty cynical. Cameron, Sergeant Cameron Shipley, Cameron Jet Shipley, the protagonist of Dissonance, very cynical by nature, and that's a reflection of the author.
How do you kinda balance that where it doesn't become too much of yourself in the characters that you're writing?
That's a really good question. Otherwise, it becomes a vanity project, right? Or a
Yeah,
memoir, a fictional
yeah.
memoir. Yeah, I don't know. Ultimately, you just kind of have to go too far. Not, try not to go too far. I was really trying to incorporate in one story an element of a person, or I was considering incorporating into one story an element of a person who had been cyber stalked, because we have been.
Mhm.
But that would really hit home, and it'd be a difficult write, probably because of that very reason. So I didn't complete that story yet, and I don't know that I will. Uh, it would involve a huge measure of opacity in my life, transparency, vulnerability, and it may be difficult to revisit. Not that I'm triggered, not that I'm,
Mhm.
a snowflake, but I do have these elements that I have to be careful, opening up Pandora's box with me about. So you do try to maintain a little measure of distance.
Yeah, it seems like that's a hard thing for early writers to do, is maintain that level of distance as they write protagonists and they become the hero of their story rather than someone they're creating, and kind of taking that into effect. But just generally, like when it comes down to creating characters, what do you think makes a compelling protagonist and antagonist? Is it motivation, drive, or just a completeness to their arc?
Uh, Everything that you just said, but like for the antagonist, first of all, they have to be someone that you're just repulsed by.
Mm,
They have to force you to ask the question, why would you do that? Why would you say that? And there's a certain compulsion that comes just in reading that character. Few characters in my upcoming saga at the end, where you're just going to go like, oh, gross, and or ew, and oh, that's awful, and it's horrible. Um, there's one passage that says the equipment, reduced a toddler to meat, with gunfire, and that's just, who would do that? You know, is a little bit of a Stephen King horror element there. But
mm,
and then for the protagonist needs to be someone that you can utterly relate to, and
mm.
perhaps not utterly, but you still have some things where you go, oh, that resonates. I feel that, and hopefully there's multiple touch points that you can relate to and connect with for that protagonist.
So yeah, no, that's just I just want to kind of we're on a character dive right now, so it's kind of a good thing that we are diving into character building and everything else, because a lot of people just don't really, they really just seem to, they just drop a character into things and just really expect things to happen and don't really do a lot of planning sometimes. So just generally, like, what advice do you have for new authors who are trying to plan a deep character, and what kind of things go into the process of planning one?
If you are, well, yeah, you just said planning. So if you are a planner, then you'll want to develop a little bit of a dossier. Who is that character? Where have they been? What's happened to them to date? How old are they? What are their physical attributes? What sets them apart from someone else? What do they wear? What kind of food do they like? Music tastes. We're all so unique and varied from one another. It's really important to be able to distinguish, because you can't then assign, this guy really likes Fleetwood Mac, but then you have her liking Fleetwood Mac later. Unless that's a common bond that you want to use to draw them together, um, it's really important to make sure that you keep that clear and defined. Um, but that's the planner side. The
Mhm.
pantser side is just kind of going with the flow and seeing, and you determine as you go along what would fit the narrative best right now for this person, and just let it go, let it flow, and see where it goes.
It's like a lot of times the authors overthink. I think.
Yeah.
Do you overthink?
um, Sometimes, I mean, my wife and I can be brooding. Sometimes we can stew in our heads a little bit and overthink some things. Sure, I don't think that it is that's necessarily a bad thing if you are a thinker. I mean, there are some characters that really require, and some narratives that really require overthinking. And we call that research.
Mhm.
You have to overthink this in order to get it right. If you cavalierly go about it and don't think it through enough, it's not going to be done right.
Yeah, I feel that's the thing, is that when you overthink, you don't write. I think ultimately this comes down to the practice of writing sometimes. And overall, I have a good grasp on these things, and it's just I want to give advice to some people in terms of like how can they approach things and everything like that. So, but
Yeah.
just changing topics here a little bit, just tell us about your series. I mean, it seems like there's a couple books. You've written a lot of books, so tell us about a couple of your series and how those came together.
Yeah, so this is the Cliff Notes version. So I don't know if you're just doing audio, but if you're doing video, for those who are
Mhm.
joining us video-wise, this is the Cliff Notes version of my Dissonance series. You can look for go to getthesebooks.com and find them there, or go on Amazon. It's Dissonance: The Alien Invasion Saga, and there are 6 books. And what it is in 2026. So we have some time. Nobody panic. Mid 2026, these things drift down silently out of the sky all over the planet. There's about 1 million of them. We don't know what they are. We fly our own drones up to them. We find they're not drones or crafts or ships or probes. They're beings. And they're hanging there in the sky silently for 90 days. We're going, friend or foe? What is this? Stock market's crashing. People, there's suicides, people selling things off, typical hysteria. 90 days goes, we think maybe they're angelic messengers, by the way, because they haven't attacked. 90 days goes by, and they wake up at exactly the same time all over the planet, and they do attack. And they are apex predators, not angelic messengers. Within 3 more months, 85% of mankind is all killed off. The rest are living underground in these fortified military bunkers called blockades. We call them Gorgons. We end up calling them that because we see what they do. You cannot, under any circumstances, lock eyes with them. You do that, it's all over. You're done. You're going to freeze, and you're never going to come out of that frozen state. You're done.
Mhm.
They're going to come eat you at their leisure, and you're going to feel every excruciating crunch and bite and everything.
Ugh.
So we weaponize technology that they brought with them. We end up, killing them off in the third volume. Spoiler, but we're humans. We have to win. And then they come back 3 years later in a second wave, wondering what happened to the first wave. Um, Pretty powerful and discouraging theme for that one. And I also wrote 2 prequels that explored the origin story and what happened, when they originally came. It's a terrifying, intense scene when you're there, when they all wake up and attack. I needed to take a break and uncouple. There's that word again, from writing for a while, because it was just so frightening
Mhm.
and intense. But it's the best thing I've ever written. They've all been bestsellers on Amazon, and Volume One's been adapted for the screen and being pitched to streaming networks right now. So
Oh, nice! Congratulations.
yeah, thank you.
I mean, overall, how difficult was it to kind of create an antagonist for like basically the same antagonist, but make them more dangerous in the sequel? Because I think that's where a lot of struggle comes from. Where you don't want to give the same antagonist because you just conquered the first set, so it's just like what's going to stop you from conquering the second set? So how difficult
Yeah,
or simple was it to come up with a antagonist that you can come up with to kind of go against in the sequel?
I think it was actually fairly easy. I mean, the typical modus operandus is make them bigger and badder, right?
Mhm.
And that's what I did. But really, the ultimate theme of the book series, and the reason why it's called Dissonance, which means the opposite of harmony, of course, is that the worst enemy of man is always man.
Mhm.
So we're invaded and overrun, and the planet is being occupied by a terrifying apex predator species from outer space. We should be banding together, all of us. We should be working together harmoniously to find a solution to kick these guys to the curb, to liberate the planet. Instead, you have elements from within that are working against us. They are putting themselves forward. They are, uncooperative, power hungry. And so that creates a war on 2 fronts. We're trying to liberate the planet from the Gorgons, but really, what we need to be liberated from is ourselves.
Mhm.
So that story, the story of making the Gorgons bigger and badder, that was easy. The story of how to create more nefarity, I'm not even sure that's a
Mhm.
word, but nefariousness on the part of the humans that you're fighting against, that took more work.
Yeah, definitely. Because it seems like whenever you have like infighting, it's always more difficult. Like who's going to be the right side? It's like when you have your heroes and you have like people with different philosophies and everything else. So that always seems to be a difficult aspect to write.
Yeah, absolutely. And who epitomizes that? Who represents it best, and why?
Mhm.
And then so we talked earlier about there's a character in Volume One Reality that is I didn't really write him as a bad guy at first. He surprised me and became a bad guy, but
Mhm.
he becomes kind of the poster child for dysfunction and for disunity. Um, this character comes to epitomize what's wrong with the human race at this point in alien occupation. And then later on, you reveal who he epitomizes. It just takes a while to get there.
When you're developing these themes of of that humans are the biggest threat to itself, and kind of using the Gorgons as a basically a trigger point for it. Like, how do you develop these themes and kind of like make sure that the reader can understand it and see the messaging without like making it so obvious that they're like, "What the heck?" Like you're just preaching to me.
Yeah, I think fortunately, dystopian environments are fairly common these days, post-apocalyptic environments. But when you incorporate dystopianism or a dystopia into a post-apocalyptic scenario, you have two really big problems.
Mm,
And young readers, teen and young adult readers and up are very familiar with that. Just throw the names like Hunger Games or The Maze Runner or even Blade Runner. Back then. Um, they're familiar with the concept enough to know that there's this big problem that you got to deal with on the human side, and how do we do that? It really, the wheels of justice turn slowly, and that's another theme in the books that just you have to give it time to unravel and let it properly unravel.
yeah, it seems like there's always a theme that we want to surround ourselves with and kind of give a nice packaging and everything else. So just it always seems difficult. Like I think not having a theme is more detrimental to a story
Yeah,
because like I think not having some type of like commentary on what's happening, I think that's needed in good fiction because if you're just writing something without real social comment, like without any type of commentary on anything, it can be something as silly as like how do you pick a good food. But ultimately, it's just like commentary to me is just so vital for a complete work that when you have a book devoid of it, it just kind of feels like junk food fiction.
yeah, that's a really good way to say it. This is the dilemma that I think
Mm,
pantser writers face. If they're not planning at all, and you have to have some kind of forward momentum, you have to give them somewhere to go, some mile markers. Otherwise they're wandering, bereft of any kind of direction. And so that's kind of what you were just saying. You do have to give them some milepost to hit eventually. Otherwise, there is no theme. Otherwise, there is no reason to go forward anywhere.
yeah, it just feels that without the reason to go forward, you just kind of meander.
Yep, aimlessly.
Yeah.
And the book isn't compelling when that's the case. It's not
Mm,
compelling. No one can relate to this. There's no struggle, right?
mm.
They're just kind of wandering aimlessly.
I think that's why when I bring on romance writers, I like to ask them about the question like, what how do you avoid it being like just junk food stuff and just kind of junk food fiction and kind of make it like relevant to what you're commentating on in the romance, because I think romance can easily fall into that realm. It feels like, I mean, because fantasy sci-fi, there's easy to make social commentary. Let's take a social commentary world of the current world and put it into a different world, but romance typically just takes place in our current world. So it's
Yeah.
like it's kind of like it can easily lose its meaning. So I like to ask the romance writers. So what is your take on that? Just like for the romantic aspects of things. I know we're not romance writers in theory, but I mean, it's just like, how do you think they approach it?
So I'm not sure I understood the question.
I mean, overall, just the question is very much just like, how do you think people who don't write in our realms create meaningful themes?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, that's a hard question. Ultimately, as an author, I like to draw upon themes that I already know and am well acquainted with.
Mm,
It might be a little bit out of my gourd to write on something that I have not has not been a touchstone in my life. I've never experienced. I have no knowledge of. Yes, you can sit down and you can interview someone and you can get all kinds of information on their life. That's done. People make movies out of that.
mm,
Just by interviewing people, you find out about what they struggle with and the themes of their life. And if you grasp the concepts enough, then you can wrap your head around writing a book or a screenplay.
mm,
I think that it really it's a dangerous move, and it's a really bold step to try and flesh out a narrative and flesh out a whole story around a theme that's relatively foreign to you.
mm,
It's also, hey, more power to you if you can actually successfully do that. Yay! that's amazing, and my hat's off to you, because that's not something I would usually try. I focus more on writing something that I'm familiar with because I know I can tackle this story better. Doesn't
Mhm.
mean I'm not going to stretch myself with some new themes. And one of these smaller themes in this book that I'm writing now may become a central theme to a later book.
Mhm.
So everything that happens to you is a resource anyway.
Yeah, it's just it's like as a pantser, is it difficult sometimes to come up with the theme because you're not really know, or do you come up with a theme first and then create the plot? Kind of how is the process of the theme work with a pantser? Because a plotter can easily just say, "Here's a theme," and they kind of navigate around that with planning. But for you, it's a very interesting way to go about it, where you're very organic with how you write it.
I think people who come up with their theme first and their pantsers, I think that's definitely possible. I think there are writers out there who go, I want to write a book about blank.
Mhm.
And then, it's going to have this character and that character in this storyline. For me, and that still can be very much a pantser, that doesn't mean that needs to be a planner. For me, I was writing Dissonance Volume 1 Reality. That was the first one I wrote in the series. And I think it was chapter 4 where I started to notice rumblings of another story. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do for that, but I'm so thankful that I followed my gut and followed my intuition on that, because that other story became the much larger story
Mhm.
of justice, of revenge versus justice, and of allowing things to just happen as they should. It didn't really take any extra effort on my part. I just wanted to let it see itself through. And if you're familiar with a theme in a story, that theme is going to see itself through because you're
Mhm.
familiar with it.
Yeah, and I feel like overall themes have to fall back to what we discussed earlier in the character. I think that we have to have the character kind of represent what we want them to commentate on. Like they have to experience the growth that they go through to kind of show that what the theme is ultimately about.
Absolutely. And they go on a character arc. That's why you have a
Mm,
character arc. So one of my greatest things that I try to do is they have this opinion and this belief, and this is very common. I'm not a novelist in this regard,
mm,
but either they're of this opinion or this mindset at the start of the book. They're of that at the end,
mm,
or the end of the series. And characters do have to grow, otherwise they haven't gone on any journey at all.
mm. I think some stories can easily fall into that trap where you focus so heavily, like these static characters. And I think sometimes, do you ever find yourself with a character that originally was supposed to be a side character that all of a sudden becomes a main character because of how dynamic they become?
Yeah, absolutely, and that can come in any kind of story by virtue of someone dying.
Mm,
That can come by virtue of someone who really didn't have um, any grit or weight or substance to them as a character step aside. So they relinquish their role, or you relinquish it for them as the storyteller, and then someone else has an opportunity to rise up. And I do have that very much in Dissonance. You lose a character, and someone else comes to replace that character with a lot of. It's very redemptive. It's a hugely redemptive stroke to see this other character come in and replace what was lost.
yeah, and I think you can add that to the overall depth of a character as well, just like for them to react to a loss in some way, shape, or form.
Yep. Yeah, and that's used, I think, time and time again in movies. I think of Ripley in Alien.
Mhm,
I think of Dallas. Tom Skerritt was such a great role in Alien as the leader of the crew, and he gets killed by an alien.
mhm,
And so here comes Ripley. She's next in line, next in chain of command, and she rises up. She takes this mantle of leadership. And yes, everyone else gets killed off eventually, still because they're the perfect life form.
mhm,
But here comes this secondary character that up until that time was just a secondary character,
mhm.
and now they're in the lead, they're in command, and it's amazing to see that. You don't expect it.
Yeah, we have about a minute left on our time. So, just what are you working on? Like, you mentioned you were working on a novel here. You're working on the end, I believe.
Yeah, it's a brand new Christian post-apocalyptic end times saga. It's not Revelation, it's not Tribulation, but it smacks of it.
Mm,
It's not the Left Behind series, 2.0. But I'm really excited about it. My wife is my editor. She's working on volume 1 as we speak, and that will be ready in March. Volume 1 is called Alpha. Volume 2 is called Omicron, and Omicron will be released later this summer, or later this spring, I should say.
Wow, it seems like this is going to be interesting. What can you reveal about? What else can you reveal about this project? Because this episode will be released roughly around when the first book is out.
Yeah. So basically, the year is 2113. It is several years after a virus wiped out 50% of the population. There's a lot of anti-Christian sentiment brewing. There are people who have acted negatively in the name of Christianity, and so we kind of did it to ourselves. Don't we always, right? There is a sinister leader who rises to the middle, rises up in the middle of that. His name is Constantine Jedediah Goodfellow. I mean, you can't presume nefariousness out of a name like that. He
Yeah.
rises up, very messianic figure to be trusted. He offers solutions. We elect him president. We know what happened when we elected Senator Palpatine
Yes.
to
Yes, we do.
chancellor. And so, but this man literally thinks he is the Antichrist. He wants to be the Antichrist. He is hell-bent on the eradication of Christianity and Christians. And we've got people who are opposing him, and you'll see the final conflict coming. Really excited about it. Thisisnottheend.com. They can go there.
Thisisnottheend.com. Perfect. Where else can they find you on your websites or social? Where else can they find you?
Yeah, you could go to authoraaronryan.com. That's my website. I always have to enunciate and say not awful aaronryan.com, authoraaronryan.com. And then you can go to, that's for my authoring website. You can go to alienssaga.com. That's for Dissonance. And again, thisisnottheend.com for the End post-apocalyptic series.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Aaron, again for taking the time to chat with me. I really appreciate it. Love the conversation we had. Hope you had a good time, and that's all I can always ask.
Yeah, me too. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem. Well, good luck with your novels, and we'll chat soon. I mean, I'll love to have you again someday.
Sounds good. Appreciate it. Thanks, Paul.
No problem. Thank you.